Keadaan kami serombongan para petani datang ke sini memang dalam keadaan wilayah ini adalah wilayah masih berbentuk hutan ya, merubah kehidupan supaya nanti masyarakat ini petani sejahtera.
Untuk minum memang betul.
Kalau dulu masih bagus.
Bagus dulu.
Oh
iya,
karena
masih hutan, masih banyak sumber kayu kan. Oh, mantap itu. Mantap dia. Tapi sekarang ini sumber bangkar sawit paling tidak bagus lagi dia karena mengandung pupuk kan ini kan.
Karena saya merantau pertama kali itu terjunnya langsung ke karet. Jadi saya ya inginnya ke karet yaitu.
The lowland rainforests of Indonesia, some of the largest in Southeast Asia. With their great abundance of different species of flora and fauna, they are considered hotspots of global biodiversity. Rainforests also play an important role in counteracting global warming, not only by regulating the climate, but also as one of the largest above-ground carbon sinks in the world. However, between 2000 and 2012, Indonesia lost 6 million hectares of forest, with the figure rising annually. In 2012, an area of almost 150 soccer fields was deforested every hour. It was transformed into land use systems with greater immediate economic value. Here on Sumatra, they were first converted into plantations for producing natural rubber. Since the 1990s, the main land use change has been towards large oil palm plantations. They are run by corporations and smallholders. Plans for expanding and transforming land are mainly decided by the government. This is a result of globally increasing demand for palm oil. It is the most economically important vegetable oil in the world, even more so than soybean oil. Nearly half of all the world's palm oil is produced in Indonesia. It is destined for use primarily in the food industry, but also for cosmetics and biodiesel. It is assumed that the destruction of rainforests will also lead to a loss of their functions, their ability to preserve biodiversity, to stabilize the climate, and to support local human populations. But can these functions be provided by these transformed areas as well? And if so, to what extent? These are important questions, but at present there have been few scientific studies and little reliable data is available. To address these issues, the project Efforts has been set up. Funded by the German Research Council, it is a cooperative program between Göttingen University, universities in Jambi, Bogor and Palu, and local partners.
As we know that there is a huge change of the lowland forest in Sumatra, from the lowland forest to some transformation system like rubber plantation, oil palm plantation, and some other agriculture uses. And there is only about 4% of the remaining lowland forest in Sumatra. So I think it is really need for us to study and to find the reconciliation between the ecological function and also human welfare.
And of course there is the need to make decisions, and these decisions are best based on, of course, scientific knowledge. And this is basically the the goal of the whole project to provide the scientific knowledge for making decisions how to go on in futures, what to develop locally. The German side establishes projects focusing on very general questions, and the Indonesian side provides all the knowledge, local knowledge, for establishing a project like this.
The research area is located in Jambi province on Sumatra, Indonesia's second largest island. Originally, it was covered by vast areas of rainforest, but the transformation into rubber and palm oil plantations is progressing particularly rapidly. Efforts focuses on 3 central areas that are most affected by this transformation: environmental processes, biodiversity, and human well-being. With more than 200 international scientists working in 25 individual projects.
Okay.
One environmental research group deals with the continuous measuring and evaluation of meteorological data. Its main focus is the exchange of greenhouse gases between a palm oil plantation and the atmosphere.
Let's go and check the tower. The rest of the thing. What we are doing here is measure greenhouse gas fluxes, so CO2, water, and methane, above the canopy. So that's why we have a tower, which is 22 meters, and the canopy is about 12. So it's measuring 10 meters above the canopy. And what we want to do is to understand the exchange of greenhouse gases of the oil palm plantation. So the technique we use is called eddy covariance, and we have 2 main instruments which are on the boom at the top of the tower: a sonic anemometer, which measures the 3 components of the wind and the 3 directions, and then a sensor which can measure CO2, water, fluxes at a very high rate, and then a tube that comes from the top of the tower to the bottom to an instrument which is down in the hut, which measures methane and CO2.
Besides the measurements at the eddy covariance tower, several other investigations are being carried out to assess the environmental effects of this transformation. For example, the transpiration of oil palms is measured to identify changes in the water balance. Soil scientists were able to prove that the carbon stocks in the soil are decreasing. This is because oil palms produce comparatively little above-ground litter and hence return only a small amount of organic carbon back into the soil. This lowers microbiological activity and nutrient availability of the already poor tropical soils. By means of gas chambers that are inserted into the soils, scientists measure the formation of the greenhouse gases, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, and methane. Nitrous oxide is primarily produced in soils that are excessively fertilized with mineral nitrogen. Parts of the mineral nitrogen are not used entirely by the plants and are released as nitrous oxide to the atmosphere. This gas is up to 300 times more harmful for the climate than carbon dioxide. In the biodiversity group, 12 individual projects aim to find out how the transformation of the rainforest into rubber and palm oil plantations affects the diversity of species. Fogging of trees allows scientists to collect arthropods, such as insects and spiders, living high up in the canopies. This is where the highest diversity can be found. The fogged animals fall into traps that hang under the trees. At this point, the range of species collected can only be guessed at. Once in the laboratory, the samples can be sorted and identified. Some species collected are new to science. They are described and named for the very first time. The studies have not yet been completed, but first results show that due to the transformation into palm oil plantations, at least 45% of species have disappeared. This is because many of these animals are specialists that rely on certain plants. But also, plants depend on certain animals that serve the function of pollination or defense. This means that any species loss can be followed by a proportionate loss in ecosystem functioning.
Basically, there are two ways of measuring the impact of biodiversity on ecosystem functioning: observational or manipulative, which means you either collect data and collect samples, identify them and measure biodiversity in this way, or you perform experiments, manipulative experiments. Most of the biologists working in the efforts project collect observational data, but we have an experiment too, such as the bird and ant exclusion experiment, in which we look at the role of birds and ants on ecosystem functioning in oil palm.
Socioeconomists from the Efforts Project study the impact of rainforest transformation on human well-being. To find out, the scientists ask the local people about the developments and changes in their living environment. Already, it has become clear that all social groups in Jambi have changed. The extent of these changes and who will benefit or suffer, however, largely depends on the cultural background. The indigenous Batin Sembilan people once lived in the rainforest. Since the 1990s, the Indonesian government has granted concessions to others, first for logging, then later for growing rubber and palm oil trees. As a result, the Batin Sembilan gradually lost their livelihoods. Today, it is a struggle for them to make a living through poorly paid casual labor.
Setelah itu makan-makan di hutan-hutan ini yang penting bisa dimakan gitu kan. Sekarang nggak ada lagi. Di sini memang orang suku anak dalam. Memang orang katakanlah suku terasing di sini kan. Dari dulu sampai sekarang belum ada dasar majunya, belum ada dusun Tenggalung nih. Belum ada.
Most smallholders in the region grow rubber. In colonial times, the Dutch introduced the Brazilian rubber tree. The constant demand for rubber provided a reliable income for smallholders, which in turn created the environment for social progress.
Saya sendiri nggak sekolah, teman kita ke depan memang ada keinginan supaya anak sekolah. Ya alhamdulillah sudah mencapai perguruan tinggi sampai sekarang.
The majority of people in the investigated region are immigrants from Java. In the early 1990s, they came to Sumatra as part of a transmigration program. The government gave them land for growing oil palms. Today, they are among those who have profited most from the transformation of the land.
Utamanya adalah perkebunan kelapa sawit. Masing-masing kepala keluarga itu mempunyai lahan ini 3 hektar. Setiap rumah ataupun setiap kepala keluarga itu mempunyai anak-anak yang sudah sarjana, baik sarjana S1 maupun bahkan sudah mempunyai sarjana S2. Berarti menunjukkan kesejahteraan masyarakat ini cukup bagus dengan program pemerintah melalui program transmigrasi ini.
But how can the desire for progress and prosperity be sustainably harmonized with the conservation of biodiversity and the protection of the climate? Efforts investigates possible alternatives to the existing transformation systems. In so-called designer plantation landscapes, oil palm monocultures have been enriched with indigenous fruit and timber tree species in order to study both the impact on biodiversity and also the economic benefit. For example, will more birds return to these areas? And what about pollinators and pest controllers? Will they be supported and hence the ecosystem functioning strengthened? The Indonesian-German research team of efforts is seeking to provide answers to these and other questions, as well as creating important knowledge about how tropical lowland areas can be economically used, while at the same time maintaining key ecosystem functions. Further research will be necessary as a solid basis for political decision-making for sustainable development on Sumatra and in comparable regions throughout the world.